Good afternoon, good people. I think you should start. The others will probably come in very soon. And I want to start with welcoming you to this opportunity to discuss community safety in South Africa. As you all know by now and realize, is that it's a very topical and current issue that everybody is discussing. In many cases from concern, but also about a very important interest in what is going to happen and how we're going to deal with it. So very welcome to the first roundtable on a series of 3 roundtables on community safety in South Africa. This specific event will deal with understanding the threat against the community and the people who live there. I want to make a special word of welcome to our guests who registered for the event and our panelist, Professor Venter, who is also bringing a special guest from his community, Mr. Dries Velthuizen, Mr. Fouchier Burger, another panelist, Professor Leba King, and Colonel Dr. Letitia Olivier. I will introduce them more extensively later on when they speak. As I said, this is part of a series of roundtables on community safety in South Africa. We are focusing today on understanding the threat to our communities and, of course, the people who live there. Our panelists will address us on how they see the current strategic scenarios, what indicators they monitor to ensure early warning on violence breaking out in our communities, and the systems to be in place for alerting us of imminent violence. These series of roundtables emanated from the violence in South Africa that we experienced the past few years and even decades. Violence emanating from complex problems such as crime, unsuccessful governance, frustrations around health conditions, and many other factors that creates an unsafe environment for people. It compromises the well-being of our people. Our research highlights the need for sustainable multidisciplinary partnerships, mobilized around a shared vision of safety for all, to include the interventions to reduce the convergence of offenders, victims, and enabling conditions. You will see today it's vital for all South Africans to engage in dialogue to find feasible solutions to create safer communities. This roundtable is part of that dialogue. MSC Corporate Solutions, in partnership with the Border K Chamber of Commerce, is presenting and sponsoring this series of roundtables. I will be hosting it. I'm from the Thabo Mbeki School of Public International Affairs at UNISA. And we aim at empowering our vulnerable communities with knowledge and understanding while seeking solutions with safety and security solutions. Now, before I'm handing over to our speakers, I want to urge you to paste your questions in the chat that is provided for in Teams. I will monitor it and I will try to refer all of them to our panelists for responses, and I will do that after all our panelists presented. You will appreciate that some panelists may answer your questions while they are speaking. So let's give them opportunity for all of them to make their opening presentations, of which it will be about 10 minutes each. I aim to finish at 15:30 because people have also other jobs to do. But these proceedings will be recorded and distributed to all participants. Now, without further ado, I want to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Theo Venter. Theo Venter is a professor of practice at the University of Johannesburg. He was previously attached to the Northwest University Business School until his retirement from the academy in December 2020. He was, amongst other things, a special advisor to 2 vice-chancellors of Northwest University. He's a political commentator, a very well-known political commentator on South African politics, especially on radio and television, since as early as 1987. He received recognition by the Northwest University as the most quoted member of the university staff in the media. In 2015, he was nominated as Agriculturalist of the Year by Journalists in Agriculture. In 2017, he attended the ANC National Conference as resident analyst for Network 24, as well as later during the 2019 general elections and then again for 2021 local elections. Early in 2022, he completed a 4th project with Theo Foster on scenarios and business decisions for CakeNet. He writes a monthly opinion column for Farmers Weekly. He holds 2 master's degrees in political science, of which one was obtained in the USA as a Fulbright scholar. So, Professor Venter, Theo, thank you very much for joining us. It is a privilege to have you here. And without further ado, I'm handing over the audience to you. Thank you, Theo.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I must apologize that I'm sitting a few kilometers from Bethlehem, being invited by the local farming organization called Meats. And when Dries approached me, I said, well, I'll try and do a double booking for a short period. And then I discovered that with this group, I have people like Herkie sitting next to me that was involved in the incident that took place near Senekal. You'll remember when the Minister of Police visited, so I'm going to give him 5 minutes when I finished my introduction to share with you what is happening on the ground in real time and what they are doing. But let me briefly introduce what I had in mind. Firstly, my role in society and in the community that I worked mostly was that of a facilitator. In other words, to go into a conflict situation and see what I can do to resolve the matter, what I can do to search for commonalities, or to at least bring the temperature down, or at least get those guys that are looking at each other over a barrel of a gun or whatever they're using as a weapon or as an offensive tool, to see if they can rather talk to each other and see if they can resolve it. And in my experience of about 30 years of doing this, there's a few things that I can jot down. And the one is, of course, an identifiable leader and leadership in general. Unless you have some form of leadership, it can be informal leadership, it can be leadership that is not necessarily what you have in mind as a leader, but that form of leadership is extremely important, because you want to sit with somebody around the table if you want to resolve a problem. The second issue that I encountered and that gave a lot of problems is that whoever takes the leadership, whether it's a group or a committee or whatever, it's just funny. I had a smile when I listened to President Ramaphosa a night or two ago when he spoke to the issues of energy. And I think very, very late in his speech, he then announced a new structure. And the new structure was, well, almost predictable, a National Energy Coordinating Committee or an Energy Crisis Committee. So very often the leadership is designed around crisis committees. And the third element that I picked up in my experience is that committee or that group or that leadership must have access to resources, whether the resources are financial, whether it's skills, whether it is support by the community, whatever you need, that is going to make it workable if they've got support. And then, of course, a good communication and feedback and searching for progress. Now, I've developed two approaches to these community conflict situations. And I looked at the Little Red Riding Hood, in Afrikaans rooikappie, for my two metaphors or my two stories. The one is you can take the short long cut, or you can take the long shortcut. You'll remember that Little Red Riding Hood listened to the wolf, and the wolf took the shortcut, and he eventually forced her to take the long cut, and we know the end of the story. Now, in community conflict, very often it seems to us going into a situation that there's a shortcut to the problem. And that is what I call the long shortcut, or the short long cut. You try and move straight towards the problem. And that is necessarily the answer. Because in your first 2 or 3 or 4 meetings, you're actually developing some form of trust, some form of situation where people can develop a believability in what you're doing, or to see whatever you can do. And then over time, and these meetings may start 3 or 4 times over. And that's why I call it the long shortcut. It will take longer to emerge out of the situation, but once you've established a rapport of some kind, you can go to some form of solution or whatever. But if you want to take the shortcut, and I've seen this at university several times, you get pressure from your top management, resolve the problem at that dormitory or that hostel or whatever. Then you go in, and before you can even say whatever, the meeting falls apart. Then you must re-establish and re-establish and re-establish. So the shortcut in conflict resolution doesn't work. You need the long shortcut. In other words, the preparatory phases and so on. Now, to enable my hosts to be part of this situation, I present this as a few introductory remarks. It would be a great privilege to continue on this platform in future. I've spoken to Dries and I said I'm willing to participate, but today to me is a kind of an entry for me. But I would like to give the last 5 minutes of our introduction to my friend Herkie sitting next to me. Let me just briefly introduce him. You'll remember that there was this case, Herkie, who's the guy that got killed? Brendan Horner. And Herkie was kind of second person on the scene, and then we had this event in Senekal, and it was all over the news, the EFF, and all kinds of guys. Now, what he got right, he got the attention of the Minister of Police to come down and talk to the local communities. Now, Herkie, I'm going to give this to you now, and you've got 5 minutes to just, I'm also almost wanting to say, to entice this forum so that they can invite you for a much longer discussion. So this is your opportunity, your favorite 5 minutes. There you are.
Good afternoon to everybody on the meeting. Thanks for the opportunity. I'll try my best in English. When it's finished, then I hope it will keep up for 5 minutes. What happened, what as Stu referred now, is during that process, I'm involved with in Bethlehem with the local farmers agricultural unions, and we've got a control center where we what we use as a communication center with radios and WhatsApp groups and stuff like that for the farm safety and security, and monitoring all the cameras that we've got in the area. And what happened on that specific period about 2 years ago, October 2 years ago, the young guy was murdered on a farm about 5 kilometers from myself where I live, and I was the second guy on the scene. And as a reaction to the information that came out, what happened the next week and 2 weeks later was all unintentionally started out of that incident, and the anger that was created with that specific incident for the one young guy that was brutally murdered. And what happened before, about a year or 6 months before that, is out of our frustration, because the lack of help that we've got from the police, and the frustration of them not hearing our plea, and we went through to the local commanders, and we asked them, we begged them for help, because on that stage we lost about between 1.2 and 1.3 million rands of stock per month in this area in the Eastern Free State. And we were trying to get help to that. And what happened then, the community asked me, because of the incident happened in my vicinity, in my direct influence area. They asked me that day in Senekal, when that was the Tuesday, I think the 6th of October, if I remember correctly, to just talk to the family and the community as a member of the community. And what happened then is I used the opportunity to make a statement on the platform that day there, that we've tried, we've asked, we've drawn up some documents with all the information, and we tried the normal channels to get some answers or to get some help, which didn't help us much. And I didn't know beforehand that what I'm going to say there is going to be on national TV or international TV or whatever. And as a result of what I said there, I gave the minister 7 days to reply. And he did reply. And within 7 days, he was in this very hall where we're sitting now. He came to talk to us. And then on that day when he was here the first time, we gave him all the information, and he said that he will come back to us. And I said, but that's not good enough. When will you come back to us? And he asked me, while smiling, he said, yeah, how many days you're going to give me this time? And I said, no, what? I won't push my luck. I want not 7 days, give us 14 days. He said, all right, be reasonable, give me 21 days. And he came back after 21 days and with some of the answers. But from that and everything that's said, there was a task team put together to investigate everything that we said and the problems that we've got in the community. And then from that task team, we are now 2 years later, and that task team didn't get anything. They actually told us this year in February that the information is now so old that they can't do nothing with it. We must get them some new information.
So Dries, I understand correctly that you got it established, but the sustainability of that process failed because it didn't work. Dries, this from our side, the introduction, to continue this discussion, we got an appointment at 14:30. I must address my hosts on the current political and economic scene in South Africa, so I have to leave that, but it was a privilege to participate, and I hope in future the dates will suit me far better than to operate from where I'm operating today. And I hope that we can discuss afterwards. And if there are pertinent questions that emerge from my short introduction and what Erkie said, please mail them to me or send it to me. I'll make sure that I share the answers with you, that you can share with the other members of this platform. And with that, Dries, you will have to excuse us to go on with our next meeting. But thank you again for allowing us into this platform for a few minutes.
Yeah, I just want to thank you and Erkie for participating. I think I'm quite disappointed to lose you now for a while, but I'm sure there will be some questions that I can send to you, and we will definitely appreciate it if you join us again. And if you finish early with the community, you're welcome. We also sent you the link by email, so you can link with a laptop as well. And then, but thank you very much for participating. It's really, we're taking note of your views, and I'm looking forward to communicate again with you in future. Thank you, Theo. Erkie, bye, donkey. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Mr. Fouché Burgers, the head of our national programs of Business Against Crime South Africa, BACSA for short. It is a division of Business Leadership South Africa, and Fouché has years of experience within the crime intelligence field. So we're bringing in the crime intelligence dimension here, and it links very well to our previous speakers who reminded us of the importance of fresh intelligence that people can respond on. Now, Fouché initially joined BACSA in January 2005, and he then left the organization to pursue other interests, and he rejoined BACSA in January 2018, responsible for crime prevention projects. To date, Mr. Burgers and his team has successfully initiated and implemented the Eyes and Ears initiative. It's an information sharing, predictive analysis, extortion businesses, for instance, construction mafia and business forums, illicit trade, the major vehicle crime prevention program, and the microdot technology projects. He works closely with the private sector, police service, Department of Transport, and the South African Revenue Services, coming in as a multi-stakeholder actor. One of BACSA's roles is to partner with government when invited and share their expertise with them. Their information, the processes they use, and especially the technologies resident in businesses. Fouché is a strong believer that collaboration between businesses and the law enforcement agencies has the potential to fight crime successfully. Fouché, I welcome you and I thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Dries, and thank you for everybody that is on the call as well. Yeah, Theo and Erkie started off with some of the problems that they experience, but I want to take it a little bit back, to try to understand, why do we have so much violence, and also where do we stand now with the conflict in communities specifically. I want to classify the violence in two categories that we see. The one is pure crime, that is for financial. It's financially driven, and they are committed for financial benefits and for nothing else. And they are very violent. And something that we cannot understand always is, why do we have such a violent country? I think that is one of the answers that we have to get to if we really want to resolve or solve our problems. Now, the crimes that I'm talking about is typically the cash and transits, the robberies, vehicle hijackings, farm attacks, the tavern shooting that we've lately seen is also a very interesting one. Now, all of the above is basically to get money or for a political gain, perhaps. But when you look at something like the tavern shooting and even gang violence that you see in the Western Cape, that is very much driven by money in the form of extortions. I'm not exactly sure about the tavern shooting, but many of the gang violence type of things that you see are people that doesn't want to pay the protection money. So this is pure and pure what you see in the mafia type of environment. So those crimes are financial driven, all of them, one other way. But then if you look at so just before I went to the next category that I want to mention is, so what is causing this? It is, and I want to summarize it in 2 words. It's the moral decay of our nation on the one side, and then also greed on the other side. The love of money, and the fact that they would kill anybody for nothing, basically. I mean, we have an example, 1 or 2 of them, but one specifically that I can think of, where there was an order out for the Toyota Taz, and they shot and they killed the driver of the vehicle because there's an order out for a taillight for a Taz. For something small as that, they will kill somebody. But if you look at the communities, now what's is driving conflict there, and it's also very violent. I think we must just understand that as well. I mean, the heart of the problem is deemed to be, and I really want to say deemed to be, the high unemployment, which I think I can agree with. The high poverty levels. High poverty levels is not necessarily a cause for crime. Your poor people are not all criminals. I think we must just understand that as well. If you're really hungry, you will steal a bread, but you will not commit a cash and transit heist. Inequality, I think, might be one of the big things that's causing violence as well. And then grievance about service delivery. Now, there's a very interesting study that was done by the think tank on governance and public policy, and under the leadership of Dr. Ivor Chipkin, very recently. And I want to read a bit of what he said in this report, and the report is available, and this is actually shocking, but we can't ignore it. They say that the elite contestation within the African National Congress has become unmanageable through its own structures and processes, and is spilling into the rest of the society, rather than a revolt of poor. The rise in conflict since 2009 is more likely the result of the revolts within the ANC. So that's sort of your political side of things that I think we should not forget. Is it? I mean, the mass unemployment, poverty, relative. All of that is definitely fueling it, but you need something to fuel it. To sort of to give the spark to it. And then it will boil over to what we've seen during July unrest. So there is poverty, there is inequality, but somewhere there's a spark that then creates this massive unrest. Now, what is the problem there, if I can summarize it? And this is, according to me, is a moral decay in South Africa and the growing frustration within communities. I mean, if you look at service delivery, roads, all of that, it's just getting worse. Now, how does that link to the political side of things, to the political calendar? And you can see that he uses as well to predict something like looting. As soon as there's a councillor that needs to be replaced, even on that level, and there's an election, within communities where there's a high level of frustration because of bad service delivery, shortage of water, the chances of a unrest is much higher there than that you will get in places where the people are more happy. So it is a combination of, I think, according to me, a combination of the political agendas, but also then the frustration due to the lack of proper service delivery. So what do we do, to predict this? Now, we have started the Eyes and Ears initiative that was mentioned in the beginning. Now, the Eyes and Ears initiative is where we use the geographical footprint of the South African police services, of the private security industry to provide information through to the police as soon as possible and as accurate as possible. But it has changed from just a normal type of information sharing, and this is on the alert level, on the real something is happening, information needs to get through to the police, a situational awareness, to a structure that is now well established and accepted as a way to share information with the police, and also to keep the police accountable for actions. And I must say that there's still a lot of good policemen out there. I know there's a lot of criticism and many times, but if you can assist the police in one hand and keep them accountable to perform their task, because it's not the task of the private security industry or a community to do the work of the police. I mean, we are frustrated, and we sometimes would like to do the work of the police, but that is not the job of the private security industry to do that. It's definitely not the task of it. So that comes back to the partnerships that I strongly believe in, but it must be a solid partnership. When Theo and Aki spoke now, they said that it was the initiative that they had there was not sustainable. And I think that is your biggest problem with all these informal partnerships. It doesn't matter, even if the minister announced it, if there was not proper contracting with key performance indicators as part of this partnership, you're not going to get anywhere. So that is really, what my views are on this. Is collaboration and partnerships to fight it. On the early alert systems, we are getting about 14 million queries a day from different places on possible illegal activities, which generates about 2,800 alerts per day that we verify and then share with the police. So the information is flowing there. But there's still a lot of work to be done. I mean, you can have as much information as possible to flow to the police, but if you sit with a community that is frustrated, law enforcement that's not always effective, because if you get away with crime, you will just keep on doing that. Thank you, Dries. That's from me.
Thank you very much, Forsier. You highlighted us two important variables. The political dimension plus the greed, the violence for pure greed. And you touched on the morality aspects of society that I hear so often cited as a problem. But those two variables leads to violence. You highlighted that very, very well. You also touched on an alert system that is working very well, and on the importance of partnerships, which will be the focus of our next roundtable on the 25th of August. So that was a very good introduction to that. Thank you very much for that. You're setting the scene for our next speaker, who will bring us another perspective. Now, Professor Lebakeng is very shy with his introduction. But I know, and I, as a colleague, I know him as a very experienced professor. He's working with me at the Tom Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs at UNISA. He was the head of intelligence for the SADC preventative mission in Lesotho, amongst many other things. He's an author of an autobiography that I want strongly to recommend if you want to know more about Tebogo Josiah Lebakeng. He wrote this book, They Blunted Us, Exile and Homecoming. It's available from Ziable Publishers, a fascinating book that tells you about the experiential knowledge of Professor Lebakeng. And he is from the security environment, and many different environments through the years. Prof. Lepakeng, the floor is yours. You can tell them more about yourself if you wish.
Thank you, Dries. Okay, thank you, colleagues. Let me start by thanking my panelists also, who we will be sharing this very important topic. I think our point of departure for all of us is very simple one. Communities are hurtful. That's a simple point of departure. They are hurtful of being under siege. They are hurtful of their properties and their families being threatened. And action at community levels becomes important. But it is also very important that when action is taken, we have at least a better picture of what it is that we are dealing with. Otherwise, our interventions will not be fruitful. I would like to take from what Mr. Berger has raised, because my point of departure has always been three issues. One, I like to look at global worries. You know, sometimes don't concern yourself with South Africa, just concern yourself with what is happening around the world. So I have always looked at that. I've also looked at what is the global peace index, what is happening in terms of peace around the world. But more importantly, I've looked at what we might call national complaint trend analysis. And that speaks to what is happening now in South Africa. And when I looked at the three, and that is where Mr. Beggars comes in, I see that there are common elements. And those common elements for South Africa speaks to poverty, they speak to unemployment, they speak also to state ineffectiveness, but more importantly, to financial and political corruption. And that last point becomes very, very important. Because when we look at what is actually happening on the ground and the approaches that we are taking to address these issues, for instance, it's common to talk of community safety. But more often than not, community safety addresses that members should be free from fear. And it could be important for us when we look at the problems that we have stated, that we probably move to add another element to community safety. And we deal with community security. Because if we deal with community security, we are adding over and above members being free from fear. We are adding another element, which is members being free from want. Because clearly, from the profile of what we have put, these are issues also that have to be dealt with. So in terms of the strategic landscape that cause violence, I like that Mr. Berger pointed out, poverty does not necessarily, we are not saying it does not cause, but it does not necessarily cause violence. In fact, criminals, if you look at criminal activity, it is an activity of a minority in all communities, in all societies. Crime is an activity of minorities. Now, how do you make sure that these minorities don't increase? You simply have to address some of these issues that have been tabulated above. Those issues of financial and political violence. Because those issues take away a lot from the resources that could be used to be addressing some of the issues that have been raised. I want to say that while South Africa seriously ranks very poorly in terms of safety and security, the country's position overall in terms of peace is very high. South Africa is a very peaceful society. But at the same time, South Africa is a violent society. It looks like a contradiction, but it is not necessarily a contradiction because the violent activities are actually done by a few. And that, for me, becomes very important because all these points that we have raised are actually clear early warning signs. Where the problem is we are not using our ears and we are not using our eyes to begin to look at the available information. We are not suffering from lack of information about things that are going to develop. That is not a problem. There is overload of information. The biggest problem that we have is how to distill, how to work on that information to begin to make sure that we detect, we prevent, and we address issues. So my point of departure is that there is overload of information. All issues that have happened in recent times, including the major one during July 27, information was there. And that information was on social media. So the same way that those who mobilize or those who are engaged in crime use social media, we should use social media to prevent crime. The same way that those who are involved in crime use relations, we use relations to prevent a crime. For me, as far as I'm concerned, and my experience is that there is always a failure to use information that is already available. And that is not a problem of South Africa in terms of the security. It's a global problem. Many of the failures have to do with the failure to have the capacity to deal with what is obviously available information for us to deal with that. As I move forward in terms of just scenarios moving forward, I think there are certain things that have to be done. I know that we are not at this point supposed to be getting into solutions and so on and so on, but I'm still dealing with the same problem. That in terms of scenarios, there is a need to make sure that we don't add to the army of criminals. There are certain activities, whether it's business, whether it's government, that adds to the numbers of criminals. And those are the issues I hope that in the next sessions we will deal with, because those are very clear issues. There are issues of unemployment. I have failed to understand why South Africa, being a middle income country, could have such high unemployment than many African countries. And the position, which might not be very popular with many people, is that many countries have actually made it the point that they outsourced their unemployment to South Africa. And government has been very reluctant to deal with this issue. Business also profits because it is easier to deal with undocumented people in terms of low salaries. It is easy to deal with them, but here is the problem. If those people that we employ and we know that they are not supposed to be employed, imagine if we were taking the lot of South Africans into these positions with the understanding that unemployment is not just a statistics. Unemployment speaks also to tax revenues. It speaks to many other things. I will stop there by simply saying the complexity of the causes of crime and criminal activities in South Africa in turn complicates the design of our responses to these issues. But there are very many issues that can be addressed with ease if all of us can put our minds together, and those solutions can be discussed in future. Thank you very much.
Prof. Lebakeng, thank you for this wonderful information, very valuable information that you shared with us in a very short time. I specifically enjoyed the way you brought out using the well-known word that all South Africans understand, the term gatvol. We understand that very well. But you also articulated it very well in terms of the current scenarios and the fact that community safety is actually community security, which is free from fear, but also free from want. That's very significant to me. Free from fear and also free for want. And that also that we shouldn't add in many ways to the army of criminals. I'll remember that term. We should not add to the army of criminals. Thank you very much for that. The conversation is not over. We're going to talk about that a bit more now and the future. But I need to introduce Professor Colonel, I still call her Colonel, Letitia Olivier, Dr. Olivier, who is a senior lecturer in strategic studies in the Department of the Faculty of Military Science at the University of Stellenbosch. She currently is the chair of the School of Security and African Studies, comprised by 4 departments: history, strategic studies, political science, and defense intelligence. A true transdisciplinarian scholar. Now, a bit of history about her. Prior to a deployment to the military academy, where she is currently, Colonel Olivier served as a senior staff officer projects at the Directorate Army Strategic Direction in the South African Army from 2009 until the end of 2018, quite a long time. While serving, Colonel Olivier was responsible for the development of the future SA Army strategic and long-term plan formulation. She established the South African Army concept development, experimentation and simulation capability. She's also responsible for the South African Army ongoing environmental analysis processes and was appointed as the principal officer overseeing the SA Army's Integration Landwork Defence Issue Team as part of the Joint Landwork Defence Capability Board. Dr. Olivier, it is a privilege to have you with us today. We're looking forward to adding to our other panelists. Thank you very much. The floor is eventually yours. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for the warm welcome. Before I kick off, I must just have a short disclaimer. Still being a serving member of the SANDF. I must just inform everyone that my views are my own and not necessarily that of the DoD. And then I was also asked that because I'm a military university educator, that my views are also my own and not necessarily that of Stellenbosch University, just to cover all my bases. Okay. Um, I am not going to repeat what the previous speaker said on our first question, and that was, what does the environment look like in which we are now to find solutions? So here we would typically look at the characteristics, and much has been said about that. But I'm not going back to, in Afrikaans, just as we all know the word gatvol, we also say in Afrikaans, skoenmaker, hou jou by jou lees. So keep to your business that you know. So now I'm going back to my work as a tactical intelligence officer, where what was said in terms of intelligence gathering, that we must always remember that 90% of what we are looking for to explain and understand a situation is available in open sources. Whenever we read all the reports that have now recently been written about the violence and riots in July, a lot has been said about the State Security Agency and, you know, the former intelligence agencies who failed to see this. But as Professor now also pointed out, a lot of this was already available on social media. The fact is, it was not that we were unprepared for this. Everyone knew it was going, because there are a lot of characteristics that we can call, as far as the review of the situation is, bubbling under. It is always there. We all know about the unemployment and the unequal distribution of resources. Then the relative deprivation. We all know we've got the highest Gini coefficient in the world. There's a lot of feeling of hopelessness, and therefore people can sometimes not understand that if in a community there is so little, why do people still burn down everything? But this comes from a feeling of total hopelessness, and typically I've got nothing to lose in any case. I think we can understand that to a great extent. So therefore, a lot of these local communities believe that they have no voice, and that their fears, grievances, and concerns are basically ignored at all levels at government, but they particularly feel it at the local level. And this is manifested as well in the poor and no service delivery. And governance, as we know, at the local level is precarious and at most disastrous. Therefore, we find a lot of overcrowding, there's not enough town planning, and this also leads to vigilantism, um, xenophobic attacks, although this is also often denied that it exists, and a general feeling of injustice, because justice is never seen to be done. So therefore, we have a situation where, in terms of the review of the situation and where this violence manifests, there's no trust in the structures that are the formal structures that are there. Interesting enough, just for your information, I know all these people are interested in this type of thing. The Human Sciences Research Council recently also published a very good research document, for instance, about the perceptions of South Africans about the SANDF. And they literally take us about perceptions from 1994 through to 2020. And you can see how the people reacted to the Defence Force at various times, but in similar circumstances to this. And when we talk about community policing, these opinions in terms of what is fair and just and can I trust the structures play an incredibly important role that we must take on board should we want to establish and find solutions to this. I think in terms of the spark that we spoke to, the spark in this case, in terms of all these characteristics and issues and prevailing problems that are there, the spark was definitely just political opportunism, and then that followed with financial opportunism. That was the fire that lit, or the spark that lit that fire. So in terms of the review of the situation, which is the essential first step in our assumptions about what we are going to do, we must get an in-depth understanding in terms of the context of what is going to occur. As I said, a lot of it was available, information, a lot of pre-warning, but nothing was done about that. So I come now quickly to the second question. I want to focus my attention to the third question. But the second question was, what are the strategic indicators for the outbreak of community violence? Now, us who have been deployed in the bad old days in the townships knew that we had several models to predict where unrest will break out, and there were classifications of violent and non-violent and what would be triggers and things like that. But I still think in a responsible way, one can go along and try and unpack a system that you want to put in place and determine it in terms of the various levels. What are the variants that will take place on national level? How would it look like at provincial level? And how would it look like at local level? And then obviously, typically we will want to have indicators of where this takes place. Is it mostly in urban areas? Is it in rural? Is it at national key points, which is also something that I think we dropped the ball there when a few years ago. And then of course, critical infrastructure and what we will do about that. And then we will look at the people involved. Who are the primary role players and stakeholders? And here again, we must not make the mistake of only looking on what is presented in the media, whether it's the formal media or social media, because that can often give you a very skewed image of actually who are involved in this. And then, of course, we would like to measure the intensity, because that would prescribe to us what the solution is that we will then introduce to prevent further outbreaks or spreading of this. Now, to do this, we actually required a blanket coverage in terms of intelligence. We cannot just have ad hoc structures that from time to time, whenever we think something is going to happen, is then put into place. There must be a type of blanket coverage with this. I don't want to go back to the old days of Big Brother is watching us, but I'm saying that a lot of times indications are for us who have worked on tactical level that when you move into an area where there's sometimes instability, sometimes when you don't see something, that can serve as an indicator that violence is imminent. So in terms of merely putting sensors, cameras, and drones there, that is not the total solution to this. Your human intelligence is still one of is still in many cases the deciding factor of how well developed your intelligence picture is there. So when we have this blanket coverage and it's not an ad hoc approach, we must understand also that this is not a short-term solution. This must be continuous, integrated, and from time to time we will have to go and test it and try and test it and see if it is really giving us value for our money. And then it mustn't be too rigid, and it must be adaptable and responsive to that specific context. I think in a lot of times what we do is, as analysts, you like to have nice structures and models that you can apply universally and you can control it, especially when it comes to organograms, command and control structures, and things like that. However, when we are working with community policing, we will have to have tailor-made solutions for that specific area. And that is why I emphasized in the beginning that we must take note of where does this take place, because that will flow into the solution that you will find. So we will then classify and categorize in terms of types, and then fit it into models of assessment that we will then use for planning and then to roll out plans. But as we said, we will only get to that during later discussions. I will then move on to the final point because we only have a few minutes. As I said, in terms of what are the strategic alert and early warning systems that should be in place to detect potential community violence. 90% of what we want to know is available in open sources. That is in the first place. Everyone knew that the attacks in July were imminent, as people in America, in all the big CIA and FBI were aware that Al-Qaeda was going to attack 9/11. However, despite all these disparate parts of intelligence lying around, no one did anything about it. So in our defense review, as well as in the National Development Plan of 2013, they refer to this onion in terms of our society and looking at governance of the whole of society, whole of government, and then joint security structures as part of a comprehensive approach to how we look at South Africans' security, safety, and defense. So each of them flows into another. Now, I think a lot of people think, but this sounds too good to be true. How are you going to get a whole of society approach to security and safety? But in terms of whole of society, if we look at the Soccer World Cup, there we had it at that time, because suddenly we had from national level to provincial level to tactical level, everyone was involved in the end state, which was the presentation of the World Cup. But we saw that civilian organizations, private companies, everyone pulled together to work into this. And it was unfortunate that after 2010, we again retracted and went back into our very structured and siloed approaches to this type of thing. So the potential is there, and we have done it. So I think we can work from there. However, I am also not blind to the fact that these joint interagency, interdepartmental, and multinational structures, it is very, very difficult to integrate all these activities. We have different aims, different objectives, very different organizational cultures, and as I said, the roles and functions are very specific for that organization. But the one thing is that true that all these organizations and structures require data. So the fact is that we must just ensure that everyone has access to the data in a controlled and structured manner. And we have a lot of examples of this. As part of my work that I did there at the Joint Capability Board, we, for instance, looked at the integrated data model. It's called the Joint Command Control Consultation Information Exchange Data Model, utilized by NATO, for instance. This is a model more than 70 years old. It's been used since the Second World War, and there's so many lessons to be learned of how they strategize and stratify the exchange of data, who gets the data, in what form and format is it accessible, and so forth. So this is one of the, I think, our biggest challenges, is that we've got chunks of information and data lying around in organizational and governmental structures, but there's even more data available at the man on the street, at ground level. But that all these pieces are never brought together into a comprehensive whole. And one of the ways that we will have to do this is to establish such a system, a data system, where we can integrate this. However, I think it must also be emphasized that everyone involved in this must be very, very clear about their roles and functions. I think last night it was on television again where they explained, for instance, the Minister of Police, who sometimes interferes in actually the roles and function of the Commissioner of Police. And that is just in one organization. So can you imagine if all these organizations are involved? So we will have to be very clear on who feeds in what and what do they use it. The advantages of this, if we involve civil society, private security companies, businesses, and things like this in these governmental security structures, is that communities will at last have the opportunities to feel that their voices are being heard, because that is one of the greatest motivations for going over to widespread violence. The policing.
Letitia, can you wrap
Yes.
up in a few seconds, please?
Okay, so this collaborative effort between security services and communities is something that must come from the ground up and not from the top down, because often we just hear the announcement of another structure that or committee that will now look at this. However, I think we must look at it from a localized and bottom up perspective as well, that you cannot impose safety and security on a community. The community must feel that they are part and parcel of the community, of the solution themselves. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It is so rich that I'm going to listen to this recording again, definitely. Thank you very much for sharing these very practical models with us. And I think I will immediately recognize where you ended, is the community as a partner, as
Yes.
an equal partner to everybody else.
Yes.
In community safety. Those voices must be heard in some other way. It can never be silenced. Another important aspect that you brought out is the importance of the integration of systems, so that people can timely share alert and early warning material with each other. And I think 9/11 is a very good case study of where things went wrong. That was one of the main reasons why they didn't. They knew about it, agencies, but the silo effect, as you named it, people didn't speak to each other in time. So those are the main points, and thank you very much for the scenarios that you lifted out. We'll definitely talk again. But I want to go to to the chat now and look to some comments and questions from our audience. And first of all, from Ian, and Ian, thank you very much for your many remarks. I just want to know, Ian, do I know you? What is your surname? I think I recognize you from your questions. Hello, Ian, are you out there? Okay, Ian cannot answer us, but I think it's Ian van Vuren. He says this current state-driven security system does not work. The private sector initiatives have at least some limited results. The concept of jointness is obviously non-existent. And he mentions the PPP as not functioning effectively. Now, colleagues, would you agree with that? The state security system, it does not work at all. Would you agree with that? And then the private sector have some limited results. How would you respond to that remark? Anybody?
Yes, Prof. Can I make an attempt?
Thank you.
All right. Look, I think partly because of frustrations. If things are not working our way, we have a right to say things are not working. But that right also does not necessarily mean it's a true reflection. It's probably because we are frustrated. I'll give an example. You know, under normal circumstances, in systems that are functioning properly, normally when you talk about community safety, and of course, because we all, as we agree, this is a partnership. Under normal circumstances, you find that the police and the local government hold joint leadership, but there is also members of the community. Because a community is not just human beings, it's also institutions. So you hear people saying the police are useless. Now imagine in your own community, you have a police station. In fact, that police station is part of the community by definition. You see that? So rather than saying the police are useless, we then have a responsibility to see how in our own community we can force the police to be part of our own solution. I think I like what Dr. Oliver said, that in terms of community safety, things don't move from top down. They only move from top down at government level. But in terms of community, things move from down to top. And that is a major distinction that all of us must make sure that we understand. Because once we appreciate that, then we will understand as a community that we might have a picture that the police nationally are corrupt, but the police in our community are part of our community. So that is our starting point to deal with those police, to make sure that they are part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Imagine if all communities were dealing with their police like that. Now, in terms of state security, look, my positionality as a retired person, I will have a disclaimer also to say I don't represent state security. But from experience, I have read so many things in newspapers. I have had so many discussions that are not in sync with what is actually happening in the state security. Take an example of discussions that state security failed to detect that there was going to be state capture. And we all believe that, right? But the reality is that the top 3 personnel were removed simply because they had said, watch, here is state capture coming. So how do we then conclude that there was a failure? So we really need to be careful, because my experiences are different from what I read about the collapse, about the dysfunction. Because normally, what happens is the top people are the ones who will work for their own interests. But the majority of officials, the majority, whether it's in the majority of officials are up and tight people who do their job. So I don't really take the idea that state security is dysfunctional or is not doing its work, because from where I was sitting, I know that is not correct. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for enlightening us on that and bringing this into perspective. Letitia and Fushia, any comments, more comments that you would like to add to that?
I can add these. I just first want to go back to Ian's comments of about the first time where he said that we still really do not understand all the factors for crime. And I want to agree with him there. I mean, I've mentioned greed, but that doesn't, like he said in his comments as well, I mean, that doesn't explain violence. I mean, the high levels of violence that we see, and I mean, if you look at this is perception indexes and nothing more than that of numbers that, for example, classify South Africa as the third most violent country in the world. Now, I know there are other countries that are more violent, possibly, most probably, but this is the perception of the world leaders, and this is the environment that I work in, is in business. I mean, if you are a businessman in America and you want to understand if it is worth bringing your business to South Africa, and you go on Google, you're going to find the numerous index that is revised every year that shows South Africa as the third most violent country. And even if you look at the UN's crime strategies or predictions, they do the same. So the violence is not really explained. And this is, I think, where the moral decay sort of comes in. I can't believe that somebody's life is worth nothing, because this is what you see outside there. As soon as a criminal that does something, and he's really, I almost want to say a low-level criminal, if he sees that something is happening, he will kill somebody, just like that. I mean, if you take what the current fees are to hire a hitman, 3,000 rands, I mean, that's nothing to go and kill somebody. So we do not understand everything yet. I think when it comes to communities, I think Josiah said the right thing there. It is definitely a community thing that we have to address. Now, I'm a strong believer of collaboration, working together with the police. Ian also mentioned there about the information that is available, and we still need this massive structures, within government. I almost want to agree with him there, or say I don't know, because if you look at the Eyes and Ears initiative, and that is driven from business side, is that we built systems of collecting information that is much bigger than crime intelligence has, as the South African police system, crime intelligence has. And we've done it within a few months. When it came to the unrest, for example, the looting, we did a piece of software that reported any type of looting that we could pick up in social media and share it as it happens with crime intelligence. But that was too late, by the way. I mean, we also didn't pick it up, and we were not really geared up for that. So I think to modernize, first of all, your official or your government crime prevention structures, or all that type of information, intelligence-driven structures is very, very necessary. I think we were stuck, and government is too slow to change. The other day I said to the minister as well, it's like working to changing environments. So this is really, I think, if government wants to play a bigger role, they will have to move much faster when it comes to the intelligence part of things, much faster. Now, business is always willing to share information free of charge with the police, and this is why we exist. And this is why our members, which is business leadership, we are basically the top 80 companies in the country, JSE listed companies will fund us, because we need to fight this crime. And if government can't do that, we will have to do more. And it comes back to triple P's, that it's got proper KPIs. That's your solution. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We especially you started offering solutions. And that brings me to the question of rule of volume. So, Letitia, I deliberately wanted to move on so that maybe you can address rule of volume's remark. He says collaboration works with proper governance, measured performance, and only if it has a solid legal framework. And then later on, Roelof also comment, SOPs in the collaboration agreement shall be very clear, embedded with strong systemic design. So to summarize, is there is the legal framework for community safety, especially concerning the conduct of intelligence? Is the legal framework adequate? Is there a proper governance regime in place? And then also, are there SOPs on municipal police forum level, municipality level? In short, is there a system that we can recognize? Can we recognize a system to say there is a system, we must just make it work? Would you like to comment on that? Thanks.
Yeah, I'll comment, but I'll only obviously speak of what I directly know of. I'm not going to speculate. What I know of this, as I said, for to a great extent, we still on provincial level and maybe a little bit lower than provincial level have some governance and agreements and service level agreements and things that make the clock tick over. All right, so it goes on. But my concern is when we come to the local level, and that is now, as we in the Defence Force always says, where the techie strikes the tar there. I don't think there's really anything going on there, and that it's more on an ad hoc and personality-driven situation. Professor Lebaking spoke about state security, but I think it's true for most of our government departments. It's not the total collapse of the whole thing. There are people doing sterling work under very trying circumstances, working with data systems and programs like in the Defence Force. Our PERSOL and those systems are 30, 40 years old. The problem is it's not that the people there are stupid and are not wanting to change things, but we are so bound by rules and regulations that you cannot change. The structures, specifically the force structures and force design, there you are totally bound by just statements, broad statements such as there's a mandate against the creation of posts or things like that. And then also it's very difficult to adjust. Now my whole point is, and that's one of the things, before I was so rudely cut off by Professor Velthuizen, the one thing I wanted to speak about was specifically the cyber domain, which is so underdeveloped for the most. As I said, I'm speaking of what I know. The ISA NDF, for the most of our systems are still analog to a great extent. It's analog systems. So we are still in all our assessments and evaluations. Look at the cyber domain as if it's a separate domain, like the air or the maritime domain, if we are deploying forces there, whereas the cyber domain is something like oxygen. It's with us in everything that we do, but none of our systems and our structures are actually structured to align with this, and that limits our opportunities to interface, integrate, and to do interoperability with the systems of the police and things like that. So I think here and there are pockets or places where it might work, but I think there are structural and systemic limitations, especially on local and at the lower levels, that will facilitate interoperability and joint and interagency and interdepartmental cooperation. There we will really have to go and look at the legislation around that.
Thank you very much. I didn't interrupt again for two reasons. The one is that I don't want to be rude, and the other one, which is more important, is that it is a spot-on assessment of the problem. The systems are there, and it also talks to what Kyle West said there to us. He said that the systems failed, or do we have systems that we have to make work? I think you responded to that very effectively. The systems are there, they are old, the legacy systems in many cases. Then there are new initiatives like that of Ushir that he's worked on. We must just make the system work. Ushir, would you like to respond to that? I don't see your picture anymore, but I see you still with us. Oh, Ushir's back. Thank you very much. Please unmute yourself. Can you just unmute yourself? I think you are muted.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, Dries, sorry, I was off for a few seconds. That's why my picture disappeared. So can you just again sort of highlight the question again?
Letitia referred to our technological systems that are legacy, and she also referred to there is a system, but it doesn't work. There is a system working, but can we still make it work? And you are involved in technological initiatives. What is your stand on that? Is the system totally failed? Must we start a new one, or can we still make the system work?
Especially with legacy systems, it's better to start a new system. That's without a doubt. I mean, if a system is still working, if the old system is still working, then you can use the information and make it better. But if it stopped working, you most probably have lost the the capacity and the knowledge to keep it going again. So it's better just to start something new.
Lovely. Thank you very much. That is in terms of technology. So one of our speakers alluded to the two elements. I think it was you, Ushir. You have technology, but you also have the people. You have the people, and that relates to the dimension of human intelligence, human team. Do we have the people who can make it work?
Yeah. Dries, if I can respond to that, yes, I think we do have it. We do have the people. If you look at technology, I always say to the farmers the same as Arki was on here now. If you want to put up a camera on your farm, you're not going to monitor and use the information. You can just as well put a washing machine on top of a pole. It will be cheaper. And so you need the technology, but you also need people to interpret the information. And also in the age that we live in, when we started off with the E2, or actually when the E2 was actually getting momentum, we were flooding the police with information, completely information overload. So we had to employ people that is knowledgeable to purify the information and to make sure that we get the focus on the right information. So it's definitely those two, technology and the people, but even furthermore, and that comes back to your KPIs of your PPPs, is to be able to make that information available to, for example, the police to be used, but then also keep them, I won't say liable, but accountable for using the information. So, but you have to have all of that in place, and that is strong structures. From business side, we easily work on just loose structures. But as soon as you start to work with the forces, the police, and perhaps the SANDF and state security and SARS and those guys, you need to have strong structures in place to manage your PPP. So, yeah, definitely the three parts, the three legs that I would say is very important for success.
Thank you very much for that. Now, this afternoon came to an end too quick, but. So my apologies to those participants who I couldn't respond to in the questions, but I need to give our three panelists a final few seconds, say 1 minute each to make a closing statement that can conclude our day. Prof. Lebakeng, do you want to be first?
I'll be first if it's at gunpoint.
No, not really. I'm a pacifist nowadays.
All right, let me just say two points that flowing from a discussion and flowing from my personal position, I believe that securitization, especially heightened securitization, it's part of the solution. but not the entire solution. That's one point. The second point is that, and this is by way of also responding to issues that were raised, that in some cases, we have not had so much a problem of technology. I think one of the biggest problems that we have has always been the human capacity. I've seen situations where we deal with other countries, we give them technology, they use it better than we are, because we think when having money and having technology is the solution. But the human element behind that technology becomes very, very important. The last point that I want to raise, flowing from Mr. Peck, you raised the issue of greed and moral decay as part of, the violent environment. I think part of what we are living out, it's a history that we have had of people who have been involved in violence for so many years, but who never went through counseling. That speaks to our soldiers, that speaks to those who are in exile, and so that speaks to many things. We have always been a very violent society, believe me. It could be that some of us were not exposed to the violence that had been going on in this country. But as far back as the 1970s, this country was very violent. Thank you.
Thank you for highlighting that, and it relates to what one of our guests said today. It seems as there are many ex-military people attending this, participating today. And I want to say to the audience who doesn't know it, most people of our generation and age are ex-military. Some by choice, some had to do it by law. So most probably you are right. That is why our generation is looking for solutions, because we witnessed violence in our lives, and we made a decision that never again. It is not part of any solution in any way. So that's part of the motivation that we are here. And some people will say it's also part of a healing process, which we all will understand. So thank you very much for highlighting that. Shall we give Burgers last remarks? Closing remarks?
Yeah, mine is going to be short. Never give up. I mean, we're definitely not going to let this fight go. Even if we're not violent anymore, we can't let this country go down the drain. So I'm not willing to give up. Thank you.
What a lovely message. Thank you for that. Never surrender. Dr. Olivier.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to add. I agree that just because it's difficult doesn't mean that's the reason to give up. And as Professor Lebakeng said, I was also unfortunately in SADF times deployed in the townships in a very, very violent time. But what I learned there, however, was even then we had several attempts of trying to quell the violence in Pola Park, in Katlehong, in Tembisa, and we worked with the community. And the one thing I learned there, and I think Professor Theo Venter referred to that, sometimes you will give one step forward and 3 steps back. But you mustn't give up, because that is all part of actually getting to know that community. Because you must find something that suits that specific community, in which those community leaders feel that they are taking the lead to a great extent, and that you do not impose safety and security on them, but that it comes from the community itself. But as I said, it's a long-term process. There's no quick fixes, and you must be prepared to take one step forward sometimes and a few steps back. But as Fushia said, just because it's very difficult means that doesn't mean that we're going to stop. I think South Africans are made of a different type of cloth as far as that is concerned. But thank you.
Thank you very much. And it feeds into my closing remarks to say that South Africans have so much going. We have so much going for us that we cannot allow a minority to rule us by means of violence. We can never allow that. So thank you for highlighting that we have everything that's going for us. And thank you very much for helping us scratching the surface. We only identified some points for further discussion. So please, members from our audience, if you don't know where to find our panelists and talk about some of these issues directly, I can help you. Just myself and Willie will put you in contact with them for further discussions as part of our networking effort. Our next discussion will be on the 25th of August. There we will specifically talk about collaborations and systems and networks. How are we going to make the system work through collaborations? So I'm looking forward to see you all again on that day. Maybe there will be other panelists. You haven't agreed yet to join me on the 21st. But maybe there were other panelists. But then you will be in the audience, if you are not part of the panelists, to take this conversation further. We're going to broaden this conversation very much. So thank you very much for being with us today. And with that, I'm sending the floor back to our hosts. Willie, Gresse, Kyle, thank you very much for your wonderful technical support for today and for the administrative arrangements. You are a super team. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for the invite. Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome to stay and talk. Sorry, there's no snacks.
Dries, can I just quickly come in? Dries, thank you very much. Just maybe for the rest, the recording will be made available and it will be sent to you that we're on the link, but it will be made available on YouTube as well, so you can also share it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Have a great evening. Have a great day.
Cheers.